Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today I found a really interesting article regarding the language capabilities of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and any member of the genus Homo, period. And it has to do with this idea of recursive language, which is basically, in a nutshell, the capabilities of a human being being able to verbally articulate exactly where things are and juxtapose two different objects in one thought and be able to communicate that through verbal language to another person's imagination to the point where they can accurately illustrate in their mind's eye what the other person is saying. So this ability is called recursive language, and I'll get into that in a second. And in this article, they talk about, they mentioned the Lion Man sculpture from Germany, from something Stadel cave. I forgot the first part of the cave, but it's about 37,000 to about 40,000 years old. And this has been a conundrum for many scientists because of not only the capabilities of the people back then to create something like this, but also their creative abilities as well. So under the description of this photo, it says, this Lion Man sculpture from Germany must have been first imagined by the artist by mentally synthesizing parts of the man and beast together and then executing the product of this mental creation in ivory. So this is supposedly an example of the capability of what's called prefrontal synthesis, which is this evolved ability or mutated ability, whatever side you want to take when it comes to that, otherwise known as PFS. It comes from having the hardware of the prefrontal cortex. So this is, it's up for debate whether this is a learned behavior, a learned ability, or a genetic mutation that led us to have this ability. But either way, it's a very fascinating subject, and there's so much more to dig into this. But this is just kind of like dipping the toe into this idea. Quote, it says, a genetic mutation that slowed down the development of the prefrontal cortex, PFC, in two or more children may have triggered a cascade of events leading to acquisition of recursive language and modern imagination 70,000 years ago. So 70,000 years, just for historical context, is when a lot of things were going on Earth. One was the eruption of Mount Toba, which killed many people, 90% of the human population or so, something crazy like that, where there was only a handful of human beings left alive. And then also that's around the time that humans started spreading out of Africa, which is, again, that's the narrative that we're getting. There are a lot of people who dispute that. There are a lot of people who think that they left Africa way earlier. I've done many videos on that, but that's not the focus of this video. And also, this is when they believe that the acquisition of recursive language was going on. So, in other words, humans were able to communicate, although very primitively. Now, this is a theory anyway. Who knows? Maybe they did have good language, elite language capabilities like we do back then. But this is sticking to the theory of this article. And around 70,000 years ago is when we kicked that communicative ability up a notch, and we were able to organize much better. We were able to carry out plans much better. We were able to discover different types of tools and invent all of this novelty into our world. And this new hypothesis is called the Romulus and Remus hypothesis, which was coined by Dr. Vyshetsky, who's a neuroscientist from Boston University. So if his theory is correct, then it solves the long-standing mystery of language evolution. So his idea was published in Research Ideas and Outcomes, RIO, which is a scientific open science journal. And archaeological and genetic evidence have already convinced most paleoanthropologists that the speech apparatus has reached essentially modern configurations before the human line split from Neanderthal line 600,000 years ago. Keep in mind that the Neanderthals were capable of speech as well. When you just look at the hardware that they had of their brain, they had the same structures in their brain that would have allowed for abstract thought and communication. So again, the Neanderthals had this capability as well. They're not sure if they had PFS specifically, but they had vocabulary and they had rudimentary verbal communication skills. Beyond just sounds and noises, I mean, they had some sort of consistent vocabulary. So they draw upon this the communication system within primates such as ourselves. The chimpanzee, for comparison, has 20 to 100 different vocalizations, and about 600,000 years ago, the number of distinct verbalizations used for communication must have been on par with the number of words in modern languages. So, in other words, ancient humans had the capability, the potential to have the number of words we have now in our modern languages. One thing that, and you guys can interpret this however you want, one thing that held the archaeologists back from saying everything but that Neanderthals and modern humans had the same language capabilities are the artifacts. So the artifacts signifying modern imagination, such as the Lion Man that I talked about earlier, burials, bone needles with an eye, construction of dwellings, they did not arise earlier than 70,000 years ago. So because of this 500,000 year gap, a lot of scientists have been very cautious about when they talk about the origins of language and modern speech apparatus and imagination and such, that they haven't been able to cross that gap, or they haven't been bold enough to cross that gap. So this is where Vygotsky comes in, and he's talking about this temporal limit for development of a particular component of imagination. So this is where we talk about juxtaposition, being able to juxtapose two abstract objects in your mind and to be able to extrapolate that into a version of reality. So he talks about modern children who have not been exposed to full language in early childhood, that never acquire the type of active constructive imagination essential for juxtaposition of mental objects, or PFS, what I talked about earlier. So there is this window of about 5 years or so of when a baby is born where they could absorb not just one language, but a bunch of different languages, and they're essentially a sponge for communicative ability. And this idea is important because that window 600,000 some odd years ago was a lot shorter, according to Dr. Vygotsky. So because of that, he says the window was about 2 years back then. Since the window was so short, and the culture back then in terms of language was not as advanced or recursive as ours is now, that the children and all their generations were never able to get past a certain point in their communicative ability just because of this window. And remember, again, this is all theory. To understand the importance of PFS, consider these two sentences. A dog bit my friend, and my friend bit a dog. It is impossible to distinguish the difference in meaning using words or grammar alone, since both words and grammatical structure are identical in these two sentences. So being able to understand the difference depends on the listener's ability to juxtapose the two mental objects, the friend and the dog. Only after the PFC forms, the prefrontal cortex, the two different images in front of the mind's eye, are we able to understand the difference between the two sentences. So you have to be able to move that stuff around rather than just produce it in speech and listen to it. You've got to be able to have this malleability of your mind to take what someone's saying and move it around to where you can find the humor or the actual meaning behind just the surface level words. It forces listeners to use PFS to combine objects into a novel scene. So take this: a snake on the boulder to the left of the tall tree that is beyond the wall. That's a lot of words, that's a lot of vocabulary, that's a lot of grammar, but if you don't have this juxtaposition PFS ability, you won't be able to make sense of the scene. Yuval Harari talked about this in his book Sapiens, where he posited that the reason why humans may have, or one of the theories behind humans taking over all of Earth essentially, and Neanderthals and all the other species of hominin out there, the ancient hominin, was because of this ability to plan and carry out plans, execute everything, and put out a layout, communicate the layout of the land to everyone else, and to guide others and instruct them, was because of this language ability. And now that this article's come out, it's kind of added more fuel to this linguistic fire in terms of the capabilities of us and ancient humans. So this flexibility, this object combination and nesting, is known as recursion, and that's why linguists refer to modern languages as recursive languages. So around 70,000 years ago is when we see this, I guess you can call it, for lack of a better word, either genetic mutation or some sort of innovation where humans were able to have a recursive language, and that just set a bunch of other gears in motion that we'll get into in a second, which led to the people today. Like, we're the last of the Mohicans, essentially, when it comes to Homo or the genus Homo, unless there's a group of Neanderthals or something that we haven't discovered that are really good at hiding. So yeah, there's a strong critical period for the development of PFS, and once that window is gone, the individual can never acquire PFS as an adult. So their language will always lack an understanding of spatial prepositions and recursion that depend on this PFS ability. In a similar manner, pre-modern humans would not have been able to learn recursive language as adults, and therefore would not be able to teach recursive language to their own children. So they were kind of trapped within their own linguistical shortcomings, because there was no one, generation after generation after generation, there was no one there to teach them a recursive language, to pull them out of the confines of that window, if that makes sense. So because of this, and if this is true, then that brings a whole new meaning to the book of Genesis. What's the first line in John 1:1? It's, in the beginning there was a word, the word was with God, and then the word became God. Or the word was God. I think I might have butchered it, but that's pretty much the gist of it. And no one knew what that meant. Well, maybe it has something to do with this unlocking of these new capabilities, and there go a new world, all through linguistics. The existence of such a strong critical period for PFS acquisition creates a cultural evolutionary barrier for acquisition of recursive language. So that must mean that this barrier was lifted by, who knows, God, according to the Bible, or someone, an extraterrestrial, some being that had recursive language capability or knowledge that our people of the genus Homo had this window that no one alive was capitalizing on. So this is a huge thing to consider, especially when you're thinking about a time like 70,000 years ago, where there's a sudden explosion of novelty and abstract thought, concepts of life after death, graves. It kind of lifted Neanderthals and human beings out from further out from other animals, separating us from other animals, and into this rarefied space of spatial thinkers and deep thinkers and abstract thinkers. The second predicted evolutionary barrier was a faster PFC maturation rate and consequently a shorter critical period. PFS acquisition closed around the age of 5. A longer critical period was imperative to provide enough time to train PFS via recursive conversations. An evolutionary mathematical model developed by Dr. Vyshevsky predicts that humans had to jump both evolutionary barriers within several generations, since the PFC delay mutation that is found in all modern humans, but not in Neanderthals, is deleterious and is expected to be lost in a population without an associated acquisition of PFS and recursive language. So I can't help but think of the Bible in terms of this. The reason why the Bible has so many stringent commandments and so many strict ways of doing things, and the way to go about your life, and the way to bring up the next generation, and what you ought to do and what not to do, may be to preserve this quality, because we could lose it. We could easily go back. I guess it would be called a drop in consciousness, and we could go back and lose this ability if we're not careful. So maybe the Bible was or whatever scripture, whatever it is, whatever tradition, doesn't have to be the Bible, whatever tradition that has been passed on from generation to generation, all the way down to time immemorial, this may have to do with that imperative, that the reason why there was such a push toward living a certain way and to push your community to live a certain way is to preserve the Word of God, this capability to even speak. So if this is true, this opens up a whole new can of worms in terms of how we understand humanity and how they developed. The key is within the prefrontal cortex, because again, we're the only species that has a developed one as much as we do. And this may have been either a random mutation, which the more I think about it, the less I'm inclined to think it was a random mutation, and more so it was deliberate and it lied dormant within us for so long, and it had to be pulled out by some outside force. The model suggests that the PFC delay mutation triggered simultaneous synergistic acquisition of PFS and recursive language. So here's what this model calls for. 2 or more children with extended critical period due to PFC delay mutation. These children spending a lot of time talking to each other, inventing the recursive elements of language, such as spatial prepositions, acquiring recursive conversations dependent on PFS, and then teaching this to their offspring. So somewhere along the line in our history, this had to have happened at some point, if this theory is to be true. Again, this is a theory, this is a model, this might not be complete truth, but there might be an aspect of it that scratches the surface of this topic. And even that alone should be enough to change the way we look at history and human beings, ancient humans, modern humans, all across the board. It should change the way we look at how we developed to this point. The hypothesis is named after the twin founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus. That's because they were raised by a wolf. The real children's caregivers had an animal-like communication system with many words, but no recursion, kind of similar to ancient humans before this explosion. And perhaps this might have happened, maybe the 70,000 years ago wasn't the first time that we capitalized on that PFS window. Maybe there have been cycles where we had it and then we lost it, then we had it again, then we lost it. Kind of like how the Ice Age and the Younger Dryas boundary and the Comet Enki and passing through the Taurids reset civilization. Maybe when that happens also, there are times within the 2.6 million years of the Pleistocene that the genus Homo was around. Maybe we gained it and lost it because, again, it was lying dormant within us for a while. So, again, who knows? I'm kind of digressing here, but you guys get the point that this could be an on-again, off-again type of deal, just like civilization and agriculture and such. And again, brings whole new meaning toward Kali Yuga and all these different types of cyclical. When you think of time instead of as a linear line, more as a cyclical, time is more cyclical, meaning that we repeat certain things and we go through certain processes and then we go up and down, sort of like the Earth's orbit. Again, this cyclical, more ancient way of looking at time. Children had to invent recursive elements to language themselves. Such an invention of a new recursive language has been observed in contemporary children, for example, among deaf children in Nicaragua. So it's been replicated in the modern time. So there is definitely legs to this theory. 70,000 years ago resulted in what was in essence a behaviorally noob species, the first behaviorally modern Homo sapiens, concluded Vyshetsky. This newly acquired power for fast juxtaposition of mental objects in the process of PFS dramatically facilitated mental prototyping and led to fast acceleration of technological progress. Armed with the unprecedented ability to mentally simulate any plan and equally unprecedented ability to communicate it to their companions, humans were poised to quickly become the dominant species. And again, we see this domino effect now. They gain this PFS ability, they're able to coordinate in groups, then they're able to trap large animals, they gained a major nutritional advantage, then the population grows exponentially, the humans leave Africa or wherever it is that they were. They settle in the most habitable areas of the planet. They spread all across in all corners of the planet. 50,000 years ago or so, they reach Australia. This is a theory again. Okay, don't go crazy in the comments. Or I'm not married to any of these ideas. I'm simply explaining to you what's being said in this article. These humans were very much like modern humans since they possess both components of full language, the culturally transmitted recursive language, along with the innate predisposition towards PFS enabled by the PFC delay mutation. So basically, they had this PFS ability. They ran with it. They spread it amongst their community. And by the way, it doesn't have to be written either. It just has to be spoken. And then from there, they spread and they maintain the PFS ability. Now, that seems to be the name of the game here, is to be able to spread, not only spread your genetics and survive in the physical sense, in the biological sense, but also in the abstract linguistic sense. That depended on basically the level they achieved in terms of population, nutritional advantage, and taking their place at the top of the food chain. Because if for some reason we lose this ability, then we essentially lose ourselves in the present. We lose the ability to coordinate, and that is really dangerous. So let me know what you guys think. I think this is a really fascinating linguistic article, and it's totally opened my mind up to how I view, again, the development of humans, of language, and ultimately of religion and civilization.